To see how we got here, rewind to when the hum was just a nuisance. One analyst heard rhythm in the trash, and the ground quietly took control of the sky. The contamination, first contact with the grid. It started as a background itch. Winter 2025, field teams along the Ross flank logged a subaudible hum in their sensor trash. Steady, boring, easy to blame on wind. Comms techs added foam, logged environmental, and moved on. The hum didn't. In January it began to breathe, soft rises and falls that felt less like weather and more like timing. 3,000 miles away, in a room without windows or a listed floor, a CIA signals analyst everyone called Vance fed the noise into an old habit, crossbin trash. He stacked polar station dumps against civilian Skywatch feeds, added open ADS-B polar traces, then layered in those luminous spheres. Independent trackers had finally clustered without getting laughed out of rooms. He didn't care what they were, he cared when they moved. The windows lined up. On weeks when the hum tightened, mid-altitude lanes, the ones trackers called Type 2, paced Southern Ocean corridors like rails. 2 nights later, equilateral formations at polar longitudes, Type 1, settled into slow, steady geometry. Ground hovers near generators, Type 3, spiked during the narrowest windows. Vance overlaid the hum's intervals on the sightings. The matches landed within seconds. He tried to break it. New weeks, other stations, opposite flanks. Same alignment. Then the weird part. Ground arrays at McMurdo and the plateau showed repeatable harmonics in their echo returns. Thin ripples in ice profiles that hadn't been there a month earlier. Fingerprinting the carrier tone against those ripples put them within a rounding error of the hum. While that was happening over the ice, pilots on polar corridors began filing notes that never made NOTAMs. Short instrument drift over waypoint, gentle disorientation during pass, and one line no one knew where to put. Blue light. No skin. Gone. Controllers cleared quiet bends around rectangles nobody named. Dead straight tracks started to curve. Vance carried printouts into a small room and said 3 words that broke the air. The ground's in charge. He wasn't guessing. Trilateration looks like geometry. It's really timing, phase precision between points that solves for where and when. GPS gives you time from above. The pattern inverted. Pulses rising from below, sky nodes answering, ground sensors recording lock. He wrote Type 0 over the bottom layer because if the sky stacked at 1-3, something under ice had to be calling tempo. Meanwhile, a British borehole team near the coast kept tripping clean right angles in subsurface reflections. Not a crevasse, not melt. Orthogonal repeats that survived kit rotation and software scrubs. An official geologist glanced at the plots and said processing artifact. The team lead smiled, exported raw, and handed a drive to a friend. 3 days later, a weather overlay blinked off above a slice of Ross for 10 minutes. Publicly, nothing. Quietly, a Space Force convoy pushed inland and raised portable mast arrays with grounding you don't waste on exercises. Local contractors were told the snowpack was unstable. They were told to stay out. The hum compressed. Vance mapped intervals over 8 weeks. The windows narrowed like a metronome speeding toward a downbeat. Each contraction got a tag. Type 3 hovers clustering at generator banks. Type 2 lanes braiding over corridors. Type 1 triangles knitting a shell. He didn't write activation. He wrote state change imminent. Then he went missing for 90 days. On the ice, the human moments drew the line straighter. A mechanic felt his coffee tremble at peak hum and watched the wall clock skip a second. He laughed until the comms bay lights flickered in time. He wrote the interval on his hand. 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Later, he scrubbed his own video. One dropped frame. Same second. A pilot on a supply hop took a detour he couldn't justify. Fuel fell into the yellow. He landed tight and kept the cockpit audio. On playback, a low throb rose right before he swung wide. Too low to hear in flight, obvious when slowed. He drew a circle on his chart where it felt strongest. It overlapped the British grid's right angles. Back in Utah, Vance called from a kitchen that sounded like night. Type 0, he said. He'd gone backward through Cold War noise, Queen Maud Land ice cube taps that burned out coils without heat. Then forward through Space Force AI doctrine that suddenly prioritized anomaly detection in orbital layers, then across citizen logs that looked random until a heartbeat stitched them together. He had 2 rules now. 1, the grid contaminated us the moment the ground joined in. 2, once the ground set tempo, jamming above wouldn't matter. People around him said extraterrestrial. Vance said architecture, because the more he mapped, the less it looked like visitation, and the more it resembled maintenance. Calibration sweeps, lock cycles, synchronization between nodes that only had to show once Earth's noise floor forced a retune. That's when he said the line that cost him friends. The hum's a heartbeat, he told me. Heartbeat means timing. Timing means lock. Lock means control. The next morning, Space Force widened the shell again. Flights bent farther. In the seismo-acoustic file we weren't supposed to have, the interval shaved one more notch toward zero. The leak, what type 0 actually is. When Vance finally laid it out, he didn't draw a saucer or a base. He drew a clock. Not the kind that ticks in your kitchen, the kind that makes other clocks obey. Type 0, he said, isn't a transmitter in the way you think about antennas. It's a supervisor clock under ice. It sets the beat. Everything else, types 1 through 3, rephases to that beat and does the work. He walked me through the logic on a napkin he kept folding into quarters. Trilateration looks like triangles on a map, but it lives or dies on timing. GPS solves your position because your receiver hears precise time from space and calculates how late it arrived. In Antarctica, the chain inverted. Pulses rose from the ground. Seconds later, mid-altitude corridors formed in cadence. A few seconds after that, high triangles knitted into geometry overhead. Ground sensors recorded lock, tiny phase closures and echo returns, like a survey net closing its solution. His proof wasn't one file you could dismiss as a glitch. It was 3 families of evidence that shared a fingerprint. First, the inverted timing stack. Pulse windows opened below, sky answered above, ground recorded lock. Second, harmonics that didn't belong in ice. The orthogonal ripples radar teams kept finding, repeatable across kit swaps and angles, with carrier tones that matched the hum within a rounding error. Third, the interval contraction curve itself, clean, exponential shave, toward a predicted 0 that matched known lock cycle math at continental scale. Then the leak landed, just one line in a contractor's email, forwarded twice and flagged "Do not persist." The algorithm writing those pulses wasn't fixed. It was adaptive. Type 0 shortened or widened its interval based on environmental noise, our noise. Satellites, radars, laser crosslinks, a roaring mesh of human transmissions bleeding upward. When clutter rose, the clock shaved milliseconds to regain phase. Noise canceling at planetary scale. That reframed the whole story. Agencies said interference and calibration. Vance said architecture reacting to a loud planet. Not an invasion, a retune. They think alien, he told me, flat as weather. I think old. Not temples, not myths. Infrastructure that never had to show itself until we filled low Earth orbit with routers and started screaming in every band. What nobody wanted to admit, if the clock lives below, jammers above are theater. You can pour power into a band and dirty a slice of spectrum. You don't move time. We watched that in March. Classified platform spikes, heartbeat slips 4 milliseconds, then clicks back like a metronome that doesn't take requests. The sky followed the beat, not the blast. Meanwhile, the physical crumbs under ice kept agreeing with the math. Thermal nodes that slid a degree in phase with windows, not tides. Metalliferous flecks in core cuttings that snapped into microalignment under controlled sweeps, then released, as if their lattice wanted to phase with something outside. Distributed acoustic sensing on logistics fibers catching whisper-thin pip trains, walking orthogonal paths during narrow windows. Each piece contestable alone. Together, a map. That's when Vance sketched the hubs. He didn't write base. He wrote hub, rounded triangles fed by orthogonal routes threading under shelves we all know by name. He didn't give me coordinates. He gave me behaviors. Pulses arrived earliest at one corner, latest at another, laying a phase slope you could solve like a surveyor. Type 3 hovers stacked near generator banks when the interval pinched. Type 2 lanes braided over established corridors in steps of 9 nautical miles per pulse. Type 1 triangles densified at polar longitudes, baselines shrinking in lockstep with the beat. If you're looking for intention, you look at what answers time. We pressed the leak hard because belief doesn't hold up in court. 2 imaging providers admitted, off record, to brief attitude trims on polar pass inside predicted windows. No root cause identified, then stopped returning calls. Public polar tiles swapped to under review, exactly when the pain held steady. A seismo-acoustic station posted minute-res traces that showed pulse edges clean enough to cut paper. We overlaid everything. Time lined up, Vance never sold health claims, but he didn't ignore bodies as sensors. Station staff wrote brief disorientation during narrow windows. Pilots bent around rectangles and only heard the throb when they slowed cockpit audio. A mechanic's wall clock skipped a second at peak and reconciled later. Thin data. Too many confounds. Still, the curve. Symptoms rode the beat. He labeled the outcomes, not the motives. Call it a defense grid if you need a box, because the behavior looks like protection at scale, masking outbound leakage in deep space bands during windows, biasing relays over corridors that couple to space, stacking audits where phase matters at the surface. But protection at one scale feels like pressure at another. Flights burn extra fuel around boxes nobody names. Tiles go missing. Maintenance zones rattle guts for 15 minutes, then stop. What happens at 0? He wouldn't guess. He listed only what the data could carry. Orbital reconfiguration, triangles anchor a new net. Signal mask, deep space floors dip on schedule and stay quiet between. Defense posture, synchronized layers damp bursts when collision risk spikes. All three require one thing first. The ground clock owns the beat. Type 0 isn't talking, he said. It's counting. That's the part agencies can't spin, because it's not a mood. It's a math problem. Windows narrow. Responses stack. Phase closes. And when the pain holds, geometry stops improvising and behaves like a system that just flipped a state. 1950s Ice Cube, the first failed tap. To understand why Type 0 felt familiar to Vance, you have to go back to when Antarctica was still a blank on maps and every blank was a battlefield. Mid-1950s, before the treaty made everybody polite, quiet listening posts sprouted along Queen Maud Land with civilian covers over military bones. The codename that survived the shredders sounded harmless, Ice Cube. On paper, Ice Cube was acoustic housekeeping, early attempts to extend subdetection into polar margins years before SOSUS matured. The kits were simple. Hydrophones lowered into leads, low-temp amplifiers, magnetic loops buried shallow in Fearn, cables wandering to warm shacks where coffee froze against the panes. Nobody briefed operators on extraterrestrials. They were told to hear Soviet steel. The first sign they'd set their ears on the wrong thing arrived as a smell. Not burning, ozone after lightning. Then meters that refused to behave. Amplifiers browned out without heat. Coils sang at tones you can't hear, thin as needles. A crew popped a junction box and found paraffin potting bubbled and rehardened in ripples, as if flexed by a field, not cooked by current. A memo that still circulates as a ghost copy labeled it non-thermal interference. Another logged equipment mortality. 6 units, 3 days, identical failure curves without overload events. Operators named their invisible culprit the cold hand. They tried distance, moved a loop 2 kilometers inland. Same song, narrowband tone riding just below bandpass, drifting like a metronome no one set. It's easy to miss how close they came. In 1956, nobody was modeling a ground-source timing lattice. They were radios in a storm, blaming the kit. Replace coils. Swap tubes. Thicken shielding. The curves mocked them. In one annotation, an engineer sketched a sign tightening into pulses over 4 nights, each night a few seconds shorter. He wrote one word in the margin, heartbeat. They didn't publish. They stapled it under classification and went home when storms erased tracks. Still, fragments bled out. An expedition doctor noting dizziness in 2 riggers during a magnetic flicker. A supply request asking for non-ferrous cabling without reason. A telegram advising a sister station to avoid a tap site vector. Unknown field present. Then a bigger story ate the small one. Deep freeze matured. The International Geophysical Year brought flags, press, the treaty shared science. Ice Cube folded into tidier programs with respectable names. The Cold War learned to look down from orbit instead. But facts age well. When? Vance dug those memos from a digitized carton. He didn't see folklore. He saw a timing field punishing crude ears. Gear built to listen for propellers had stuck its fingers in a metronome and got slapped. The non-thermal signature matched what modern arrays recorded when the hum crested decades later. No heat, rapid drift, harmonics that don't belong in ice. Meanwhile, 3 days after a recorded pulse train in 1958, a polar overflight logged compass jitter over a rectangle of ice nobody had mapped. A week later, a different aircraft circled wide without writing why. Pilots didn't talk orbs then. They wrote heavy air and radios that went honest again once they cleared the box. Lay those old rectangles over Vance's hub map, and the overlap gets uncomfortable. The pilot bends sit inside the rounded triangles he now labels hubs. The heartbeat curve from a 195's engineer, crude as it is, shows the same contraction cadence, only coarser. And that ion smell in the shack. Modern station notes use a drier phrase, ion scent during narrow windows. There's a quieter echo in doctrine. When Space Force formalized anomaly detection and wrote passive observation into polar playbooks, you could hear Ice Cube in the footnotes. Avoid injecting power into unknown fields. Prefer passive ears. Ground well. The playbook didn't say why. The old memos did. They also explain why jammers don't win. Ice Cube teaches the wrong lesson fast. In a timing field, more power is just louder wrong. Those operators drove closer, broadened band, and found the edge where phase stress flips fragile components into failure. If you felt your fillings hum near a high-power radar, you know the category, wrong tool, right wound. The human pieces belong here because bodies are sensors whether anyone funds them. One rigger's headache that matched the tightening pulses. A tech dizzy for 5 minutes during a flicker, fine after coffee. Thin anecdotes, but the timing sits on the beat. Vance doesn't call it harm. He calls it proximity. Maintenance zones don't ask permission. So the first failed tap wasn't a failure. It was a prologue. It proved there was something to touch, and that crude ears can't stand inside a clock. Then the world got busy and forgot. The heartbeat didn't. It waited under ice while we filled low Earth orbit with routers and made enough noise to force a retune. Look at the pattern through that lens, and the 195's read like the first warning label. Don't push power at time. Don't confuse silence with absence. If you insist on listening with the wrong kind of attention, the metronome answers by tightening the beat until your gear leaves. Ice Cube stopped tapping. The hum kept time, and when the countdown reappeared 70 years later, it sounded exactly like something old quietly reclaiming the clock. 2025 to 2026, the surge no one could spin. You could chart the change without a single press release. Through spring 2025, the hum sat under daily noise, irritating, measurable, survivable. Then the incidents stacked where polite language runs out. Out on the Ross flank, echo traces that used to meander compressed into clean pulse trains. On, off, at intervals that ignored weather and shift changes. Dome C picked up the same step pattern cadence, like something underneath had switched from idle to clock. While that lived in the ice, orbit got uncomfortable. 2 imaging platforms on Polar Pass recorded transient loss of fine pointing. Tiny attitude trims that shouldn't happen in clear sky, followed by frames the public never saw. Providers blamed solar weather. The solar indices didn't agree. Internal notes used a different word, anomalies coincident with windowed interference. 3 days later, pilots on polar corridors wrote lines that controllers didn't want on radio. Short drift in headings near waypoint, recovered. Instrument lag during pass, no turbulence. One cockpit audio caught a low throb, just before the captain requested a gentle reroute around a square that didn't exist on charts. He couldn't justify it without sounding superstitious. The controller cleared it as icing, on a night so clean the stars felt close. Civilian trackers, ignored until denial gets expensive, watched the sky stop improvising. Type 2 corridors formed broad arcs pacing naval staging routes farther north than usual. Type 1 triangles appeared at higher cadence over polar longitudes, holding equilateral spacing with the steadiness that turns skeptics into mathematicians. Type 3 hovers doubled near station generators at exactly the minutes the hum narrowed. Independent teams time-stamped everything. Windows matched within seconds. Vance had already drawn it on a board. Seeing it land on instruments burns doubt out of a room. A contractor running a microwave package out of a coastal camp recorded bursts, aligning with pulse windows down to the second. He assumed interference until 3 separate sweeps at 3 separate elevations came back with the same cadence. He sent plots to a boss and got a reply that wasn't words, just a highlighted non-disclosure clause. Publicly, the story stayed small. A weather overlay blink off over a slice of Ross, a line in a catalog about temporal coverage gaps, 2 rerouted flights with bland explanations. Backchannel vocabulary changed, surge density, window contraction, node sync. And trucks moved at night.